the same time?
I would need to do a lot of things to do this. So for instance, I have to go into hypnagogic state between sleeping and waking. I dream in pictures, not all people do, but before I wake up, I have a time before my language center boots up. And in that time, if nobody disturbs me and I don't hear noises and voices in my environment, I can visualize what I want. But in my normal mode, it's very difficult for me to switch back. Maybe if I would have enough attention to learn to become a meditator or would go heavily into psychoactive substances, maybe I would be able to modulate my brain accordingly. But in my normal mode, I can't. And so I regret that I don't have imagery when I close my eyes, but I can generate the code to make the imagery. And so I know when I want to visualize a doorknob, I need to make a surface and then extrude a cylinder from it and then extrude some hyperbolic surface from it. And it's very similar to what I would do in a 3D program. But I don't need to look at the pixels. Why would I? Right? I know what the pixels look like. I can draw it, but I don't get to see it outside of a dream or hypnagogic state. But it's something that I learn about my own cognition by using the insights that I get from working with computers. And then also to compare with other people to see that their minds work differently. So their minds make other trade-offs.
Back a bit, and this gets dense, but here.
I have a quick detour. It's not quick at all, but it's related.
Part of the extraction
What are your thoughts on consciousness? So too big a question to ask. This far along, but
that's a super easy one.
The qualitative aspect. So we've kind of you've kind of proposed in some ways a sort of a superset of language, which encompasses the kind of language that LLMs have mastered, and then maybe other languages of thought. Is there something? And then we've talked a little bit about the parallels or similarities, the unknowable at this point between human cognition and LLMs. Is there, first of all, is the language of thought or the linguistic language, the natural language in LLMs potentially a source of sentience in your view? And secondly, if not, whether or not is the other language, say the spatial language, the kind of thing that non-aphantasics do all the time, although you do it with your eyes open as well. Of course, you have visual experience. Is this? Are you inspired, and do you think that there's relevance in what's happened in the AI space and the LLM space for the question of human experiential phenomenological consciousness?
And I know that's we don't know what the relevance is yet. So when we look about consciousness, there are several angles that we can take. One is what it's like, right? What we see introspectively about it, phenomenology. And this phenomenology of experience yourself and the act of experience while creating a bubble of nowness that you inhabit. Consciousness always happens now. I think this is what is the core of phenomenology, the second order perception. And I suspect the reason why we have this second order perception, not just perceiving things, but also perceiving that we are perceiving them, is that it's a self-organizing system. So there needs to be some kind of control structure that is stabilizing the observer. The reason why we have the observer is we need some kind of maestro that is orchestrating this mental orchestra to make it coherent. For the same reason that an orchestra has a conductor that steps in and removes disharmonies. We have something that makes our own working memory contents coherent. And that's our conscious attention. Whenever there is something incoherent in my perception, my attention gets drawn into it, and my consciousness attends to it until it becomes coherent. So it's a resource allocation that is happening via some kind of observer, and the observer stabilizes itself via the second order perception. It's basically the function that stabilizes the screen. There's also a third order perception, that's the first person perspective, where it becomes apparent to you that you are observing and you establish yourself, perceive the observer, not just the act of observation. And maybe a fourth order perception where you transcend this and realize that you're just generating the observer and you get enlightened. You realize that there is not actually an observer, but there is something that makes it happen. And so everything becomes a representation. But that is something that you see from the inside. And then you look from the perspective of the mechanisms. These are the substrate properties that you can observe in the lab, like neural correlates, neurotransmitters, and so on. And the hard problem has to do with the difficulty of mapping phenomenology to mechanisms.
What do I see?
And I suspect that's somewhat futile, because that's like trying to understand the economy by studying ink on paper.
As being valuable in my system.
By
Just
studying
what?
ink
What was
on
the last
paper,
thing
you're
you
not, if you want to study the economy by looking at ink on paper,
Oh, ink on
if money is printed on banknotes, right? You're not going to learn very much about how money works, because money is fundamentally a causal structure. Right? Money is not just currency that is printed on coins or on banknotes, but it's an AI that is stringing 8 billion talking monkeys into a global intelligence.
Identity.
And it's
smaller
virtual
story in the
dopamine,
middle
and it
where we
uses
tell
itself.
ourselves
So it looks for a substrate that it uses that it can possess. And the
becomes a
substrate
seed of
itself doesn't
snowball.
matter so much. It needs a substrate. It needs to
it's
be
at the thing, it's the
represented
center.
with a substrate.
Also
But by
worth
just
noting
studying the
is,
substrate properties, you're not learning very much about how it works
As I bring
and
it
why
up.
it works. And this is the issue with neuroscience. Neuroscientists would need to look at representation if they want to understand consciousness, not just at neurons.
in this
Yeah.
Dionysus
And
version.
so we need to look
is,
at the third perspective, and this is the functional
Metzinger's
perspective.
self-modeling theory
And functionally, consciousness
of
is an
consciousness
operator on mental
or
states.
subjectivity.
Your mental states change in a
Embedded
particular
within the
way when
integrated
consciousness
world
comes
model
along.
theory.
How
which
does your mental state change
part of their
when you wake up in
integration
the
is
morning, or when
information
you go into
integration
deep sleep, or when you space
That's
out,
another topic
or when you have an
honestly right here.
epiphany?
So
And I think what happens in all those cases
about
is
the
that you
purpose of
become
the
more or less
system
coherent.
and creates a narrative.
So I
model,
suspect
which was
that
what I
consciousness
wanted.
is an
Ideally,
aspect
I
of a
wanted
biological
narrative
learning
models
algorithm that works for
to be
self-organizing
generated
systems.
and then fed back in the
And that
system
is
to
the
increase
prerequisite
its,
for learning. We observe that if infants
to be
don't become
leveraged with its
conscious, they
self-consistency
don't learn.
to inform future
They remain
decision-making.
vegetative.
The goals for this
Human
new
beings
local
don't become
system
conscious after the PhD. We become
that,
conscious before we're able to track a finger. So
how do you say
it's the
a
thing that
local
is at the
system
beginning.
that as you drop new information
And
into it,
so,
continues
like
to
the
evolve
transformer, consciousness
existing
is probably relatively
information
simple.
and
Transformer
it,
is simpler than
makes
what the
more
transformer
efficient our
learns.
own learning process
And consciousness
by
is probably
kind of
simple
stripping
enough to
out
be
the things
discovered
that
in the
already
infant
know
brain when the
from an
infant
existing
brain is
document and
confronted with the task of learning and self-organizing.
even at the same time.
So I call this idea
anchoring
that
it back
consciousness
to
happens
how
at the
it relates
beginning,
to
the
the
Genesis
stuff.
hypothesis.
So
The idea that
this coherence,
consciousness is the thing that is
concept of
creating
narrative
coherence. I call this the
consistency
cortical conductor
not only
hypothesis.
maps to how the human
And
mind keeps
when
up
we now
together,
go back to your
but
original
also
question, Ellen,
provides
about
the system
LLMs,
with a
what they
handy,
teach us, the question is, do they have phenomenology
for
and do they have functionality?
an identity-based network.
So it seems clear to
identity-based
me that in order to
implementation
function, the
of
LLM
this
doesn't need consciousness.
information container,
It doesn't need
which
to
is
have
a
this
narrative
coherence
information
maximization.
container.
It also seems to be coherent only in the
I won't go
limit.
into these,
You
it's too
start
hard
out
to
with
just
training it a little
go
bit,
code.
and it's completely incoherent,
So,
produces stuff that
in your
almost looks like
guidance
language.
system,
And you train it a lot, and you get a few paragraphs of text, and you train the entire internet into it, and it's almost fully coherent. And for us, coherence seems to be at the start,
So,
something that we're optimizing for. So I suspect the functionality is not
by
in there.
adding more
But
facets,
phenomenology,
more
I don't
detail,
know.
we'll be able to model
If you
it
ask the
closer.
LLM to
Worth
do
noting
spatial
is that the
cognition,
centaur
it can do
AI,
spatial
which,
cognition, right? If it's trained enough, you can ask
fed
it, imagine a room and you arrange a bunch of
studies,
chairs in the room and there are in this geometric figure, and now you rotate by 90 degrees and now describe what you see in the
tokens worth of
room.
information
If the LLM pulls it off, it's not just deep faking spatial cognition, it is
that
performing the
once they
causal
programmed
operations
it, I think it was a model
necessary
D,
for representing objects in
initially, once they
space.
programmed it
If
to
you ask an
become,
LLM to do theory of mind on you, to guess
centaur
your
AI
mental
with
states
this
when you
data,
talk to it, it is
beat all
also going
other
to give you theory of mind instead of just
all
deep
other,
faking it. And it's pretty good at it. Right? And
models
when
that
you
were
ask
trying
it,
to predict
simulate
human
what it
thought.
would be like if you had the following
Marcel
experience.
Bentz,
Who's to
who,
tell if
I
it's more
think was
simulated
one
than
of
your
the
own experience? Because your own experience, after all, is a
researchers,
simulation of what it would be like
he has
if you
a
existed
good
to
bit of
experience.
information about meta learning, learning to learn, and in context.
You think it could have spatial awareness or
So,
sentience or
some of that
phenomenology?
applied
Hold on,
Yeah.
real quick,
Centaur AI.
because there's a bunch of
Centaur AI
people
was
that
too
walked
big for me
in.
to put on a
Just for
system,
everyone that's
and I
sort of
make sure
joined
I'm
in, I think
jumping
we
into
got
the
a
world
whole
of,
chunk of people. We've got Yosha
running
Bach
something
from the
with a
California
full
Institute of
app
Machine Consciousness, and then we have Professor William Hahn and Alon Barinholtz from the
the
Machine
accelerator
Perception
runs.
Cognitive Robotics Lab that they co-founded.
What they
And today
found
we're
was
talking
that the
about,
prompt
as you probably
environment,
just heard, things about consciousness, different forms of computation,
I'm
different
actually
kinds of
putting this
minds, how
together
language
literally.
interacts with
Right here,
perception,
this
all that
is
kinds of stuff.
more notes to
Just
self.
for
So
the
when I
people
come
walking
back
in.
and
Sorry,
So
continue.
wonder
do you,
in a
you
few
think there could be
weeks,
emergent
what the hell? I can
sort of
literally
visual
notes,
phenomenology?
got this rooted.
I mean, blind people can learn how to speak about spatial spatial matters, and I don't know if they would claim to have
Functions in here,
visual
which comes
phenomenology.
from
You
Marcel
think it's
Bentz's
possible
work.
that the LLMs could end up with something like sensory phenomenology, despite never having any sort of sensory inputs. I'm not talking about multimodal models, although that doesn't really help that much either. You think they could arrive at that? It could be kind of an emergent.
And Friston's work, free
Yeah.
answer theory.
Okay.
If it's a simple causal structure, there is an interesting hypothesis that was discovered by Chris Ohlers' team while he was working at OpenAI to invent mechanistic interpretability. What this team did was they looked at different vision models with different starting architectures and slightly different algorithms and different data sets. What they found is that all these models had the same structure. So they all have a similar structure as the one that you find in the human visual cortex, where at the lowest level you have spatial frequencies and directions that are combined into edges, color detectors and so on, and then at higher levels you get geometry, and the textures are being merged in a particular way. They even found a new kind of detector, a high-low frequency detector that was previously unknown and that had subsequently been discovered in the mouse cortex. It's a special type of neuron in the immediate representation that becomes active when you are looking at the boundary between high and low spatial frequency, which often happens when you have an object in front of another object that is more distant.
As an aside, what they found is that,
and so what they came up with is this idea of a universality. The universality hypothesis is saying that the structure of the model does not depend on the algorithm or on the data or on the architecture of the model, but it depends on the mathematical problem that is to be solved. And so the mathematical problem of vision and the statistical structure of the stuff that you're looking at is determining what your model is going to look like.
Bernard Barr's global network.
But if you take the universality hypothesis to its extreme, if you were to train a model on your input and output for long enough, are you going to wake up in it? Right? We don't know that. But it's a super interesting thing to think about and to meditate on, because after all, you're just end-to-end trained on being human.
Neuronal workspace theory.
Or are you? Or is there something different? Is there some kind of essence? Probably not, right? Evolution is just a slow learning process. So what evolution is doing, you can also do this as part of your hyperparameter search in the model. And it itself is not different from what machine learning is doing. So there is nothing in the biology itself that determines this. But there might be substrate properties. Maybe some algorithms work better on CPUs that they work on brains. And vice versa. So it could be that if you train a model to produce human text, that if you give something a lot of memory and a lot of fast GPUs, that it ends up with a different type of solution than when you give it only a human brain to train on. But we don't know that.
And we don't really know if there's an analog digital divide, and that's the other thing. It's possible that the biological substrate is somehow fundamental. It's continuous in a way that LMs simply aren't, right? Even though the hardware is continuous, but what they're instantiating is ultimately a digital computation.
No, nothing is continuous in this universe. Everything in this universe is discrete, because continuous stuff is not computable. It cannot be represented in constructive languages. So it cannot exist.
Mainly because
physics is
yes, physics has smallest units for everything. If you actually look into the physical universe that we are in, everything is quantized.
Nothing's ever been measured with more than 18 decimal places.
Yes, but also the stuff that you are interested in, like brains, made out of discrete molecules. And they only have a finite resolution that matters. Right? Beyond a certain level, there is noise in the signal. And everything in your brain relies on other parts to function to a certain degree, and beyond that, it's noise. So it's not like there is secret stuff below the noise that is moving stuff.
I might pull
what matters is only how much determinism you get out of the box. And so that's why CDs work. That's why you can digitize sound. It is not necessary to have infinite resolution when you want to digitize sound. Right? You could argue that to some degree of approximation, the vinyl record is continuous. Only it's not. There are molecules. Right? And it's not even the individual molecules that matter, because you cannot press the individual molecules into shape, because they're little lumps made from the molecules. And so what matters is the resolution of lumps of vinyl that you can control. Beyond that, you only have noise on your vinyl record. And so if you measure the vinyl record to the level of where you have signal in it, and you reproduce the signal in an arbitrary substrate, you can simulate the dynamics. There is nothing magical about this beyond it. And that's why I'm quite confident that this
So,
digital analog
found
divide
very
does not
cool.
actually matter.
So the
But what
expectation
matters is, for
is
instance,
that
if you are
we'll be able to
living
pull
on a
off
computer
this,
that is error correcting, and where the function changes with body temperature or with subtle influences in the environment. So there can be a long tail of effects that you might be interested in.
offloads a lot
But
of
maybe if you are sitting
curiosity
next to
work
somebody who's very
in the
fidgety,
spirit
and
of the
your body
user. We were
notices this,
searching
not
out
even your
Dionysus
nervous
at.
system. Maybe there is some physical
So whatever
interaction
you're talking
that is
about that
influencing
day,
your
the
mind in
machine
subtle
goes out
ways,
and
and
gets
you want to
smarter about
simulate your
so
emotional
that
state at
those
a
has
fine
this information
resolution.
at the ready.
And then you have to deal with the fact
Well
that this is
digested
probably
and
going
well
to be missing
synthesized,
in your
including the
abstraction.
newest stuff on the internet
Mm.
to ease the process of
Quantitative, not
accelerating,
qualitative.
catapulting your growth
Just
forward
Yeah.
based on
But the quantities can be very important.
saving time, rereading redundant information.
Sure, and that's
And
if we come back to the
being
visual
ready
perception,
and willing
qualitative,
to educate
color
people's
space
perspectives
maybe not
and
truly
the latest
continuous as you were
on,
pointing out, but it's a heck of a lot
certain
closer than
aspects of
the words red and
current
blue.
concepts
And there's the
Red
universe,
20%.
the physical universe,
Okay.
and the representation of the physical universe in our optical system, in our visual system, is